is the Bearcast, presented by Bird Culchin Ford. Bird Culchin Ford has been in Waco since 1936. Ford is the #1 selling truck in Texas, 43 years running. The Bearcast is also presented by WellMed Medical Management and USMD Health System Dallas. Here's Craig Smoke and Grayson Grundhafer.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into a brand new edition of the Bearcast on SicEm365.com. I'm Craig Smoke, SicEm365.com team reporter, also SicEm365 radio host, joined as always by Grayson Grundhafer, director of broadcasting, also SicEm365 team and recruiting reporter. We've got Jack, we've got Armstrong behind the scenes as well, making the show happen, and do appreciate their efforts as always. And we've got a very busy week in Baylor football recruiting to recap here. Man, what a run this staff has been on over the last month or so. I put out a tweet yesterday that got a little bit of play, basically just saying what a run. And I put dates, and I put 6/1, which was the start of the month, obviously. And next to that, I put dead period ends, because that is when, for the first time in well over a year, the dead period finally drew to a close just 29 days ago. And then underneath that, I put the commits that Baylor has received since the dead period ended on June the 1st. We are now on June the 29th, and there are 8 names that have joined this list since the dead period ended. So, yeah, safe to say the month of June has been pretty kind to the Baylor Bears, and just in the last week, since the last time we talked to you, 4 more commitments for Baylor following the 4 previously that we've discussed: Caden Siraki and Trey Emery and Jordan Nabors and George Maye, and now Grayson, 4 more to get to. So without getting into names, because we'll go over that, and we'll also hear from one of the brand new commits on the show today. Our first interview on the Bearcast, we will talk to one of the 4 brand new commitments who made his decision just 3 days ago. Without getting into specifics, before we decide to get into specifics here in just a second, your thoughts on, well, safe to say, a pretty successful recruiting weekend once again for Baylor.
Absolutely, and we can add another name to the list as well, Craig, because Isaiah Crawford got the ball rolling in the 2023 class. So,
Yeah.
they're even working, a class ahead as well, big 4-star prospect, so we'll talk about him as well, but they have just been on a tear, and I think the official visits are the biggest reason why. The fact that you're able to get kids on campus and actually be able to build relationships with them has been huge, and it's been a major factor in kind of building this class out, that along with the relationships. So amazing 2 weekends for Baylor. Now they'll take a break from official visits, and obviously the dead period arrives in July. So you won't have a lot of visits coming up anytime soon as fall camp approaches and Baylor kind of gets ready for their season. But they don't really have a whole lot of work to do anymore, because they've built out this class to a very high level. 18 commits now is where Baylor sits. So not a lot of room left, and a lot of big decisions to make for the Baylor staff.
Yeah, it seemed like, it would have been just about a month ago when they were, sitting around 10 commits, and you say, and we did say at the time of, what does this look like? Everything's about to open back up. How much room do they have? What positions will they lock in on? Well, we've learned a lot in the last month with 8 brand new pledges and 9, including the 2023 commit, as you mentioned, Isaiah Crawford. So we'll save him for last. But let's get into the commits, and that's kind of going to be the focus today on the show. You will hear from one of these brand new commits. As I mentioned, Anichi Sledge will be with us on the show today. But we're going to mostly talk recruiting and then answer your questions in the mailbag. And that's kind of just what we're going to focus on, because not a whole lot to report outside of that right now. So let's get it started, Grayson, with the list of players who all started this snowball rolling over the last few days. And let's start off with the young man who we'll hear from here in just a little bit, Anichi Sledge. He will get into his commitment, so I don't think we have to get too deep into his thought process, because we'll hear it from him. But Anichi, big-time defensive lineman, Louisiana guy. We know Baylor basketball's had some pretty good success with those Louisianimals, and Baylor football trying to have some as well. Not the first time they've dipped down there, but always good to go grab some talent out of the boot, because there's a lot of talent down there. So your thoughts on another defensive line commit. They didn't have any, and now you got Trey Emery and now Anichi Sledge as well.
Yeah, really nice start to the class on the defensive line, which was a position I think we were all a little bit worried about because they simply hadn't added anyone. But, of course, official visits changes that a little bit. But Anichi, 6'4", probably a little over 300, honestly, will kind of fit into that nose tackle mold in this 3-4 scheme for Baylor. He's got a good offer list: Kansas State, Indiana, Memphis, Purdue, SMU, Troy, West Virginia. Took official visits to Indiana and Purdue before eventually deciding Baylor was the place for him. And he got the offer June 5th. And then, of course, everything was all signed Baylor after that. I put a prediction in the day after camp just because I knew his connection to Baylor was very strong. And even with the visits he had planned, he never wavered. And so really excited that he's on board. I think he's a guy who's kind of a sneaky, underrated prospect in this class, and I think he's going to pay huge dividends as they try to really mold a nose tackle for the future behind Apu Aiko.
Yeah, and Apu did have an influence on his decision, as you will hear. He's gotten to know Apu a little bit, and actually he and Apu, I don't want to make it sound like they're buddies, like best friends or anything, but as far as Anichi making note of Apu, it goes back to LSU. So you'll hear about that. But, yeah, there's already a connection there that goes back to Baton Rouge that will now be hopefully exploding in a really good way up front on the defensive line for Baylor. So Anichi Sledge makes the call. Also, you had wide receiver Caleb Douglas making the call just a day later on the 27th. We knew that they needed some wide receiver help. We talked about that, a couple weeks ago, and then Jordan Nabors committed. And so kind of like with Trey Emery leading to Anichi Sledge, Jordan Nabors now leads to Caleb Douglas. So a second wideout now in this group. And Grayson, we had an opportunity to talk to him on Sikkim 365 radio. Seemed like a really sharp, good, excited young man, and had some good things to say about Chancey Stuckey and the staff. So what do you like? What do you think of Caleb Douglas joining the fold?
Yeah, I was able to talk to him about a week ago. So I guess it was 5 days before he made his decision to commit to Baylor, and he was already nearing that decision coming off of his official visit. 6'4", right around 187 pounds, had offers from Virginia Tech, Colorado, Kansas State, USC, Texas Tech, Utah. But I think the biggest things that stand out about him from a, kind of what got him to Baylor perspective, Dave Aranda, Chancey Stuckey. Those two guys, it was very clear, played a huge role in his recruitment. Dave Aranda, he mentioned it many, many times, but just the simple fact that he was much more involved in Caleb Douglas' recruiting process, more so than any other head coach of any school that was recruiting him. And that was a huge key note for Caleb. And then, of course, Chancey Stuckey, this was his first offer when he got to Baylor. Caleb Douglas. That was his first offer that he put out. And Chancey Stuckey let him know that. He told him, we want you. We want you, we want you, we want you. And that stood out to Caleb Douglas more than really anything outside of Dave Aranda. And getting to meet Chancey Stuckey for the first time, I think really showed him, this is the coach I want to be around, who's going to mold me into the wide receiver I want to be. Their one-on-one meeting really stood out to him on his visit. They do this really cool thing, and they did it with Caleb, where they show his high school film, and then Chancey Stuckey shows it on the field, on the college field, kind of where that fits in, where that translates to the next level inside of Jeff Grimes' scheme. And so I found that to be very interesting. Obviously, everyone's going to talk about, why doesn't he have a ton of production? He was first team all district last year, but I think there's reasons where you're like, man, why isn't he having 1,000 yards and 12, 15 touchdowns? Well, he was a quarterback up until last year. So he's still very raw, still learning the wide receiver position, the nuances of it. But he's going to have a massive year this season. 4.5, 240 time at 6'4", a 12.9 broad jump, and a crazy 80-inch wingspan. So really does have some freakish qualities to him, and I think that's why you're seeing his ratings really get boosted. I know ESPN released that he's a 4-star on their model, and he's nearing 4-star status on Sikkim 365 as well. I think he's an 88 right now, which could be growing if he has a big senior season. So a really nice pickup, adds to the wide receiver depth. They now have 2 wide receivers in the class, and I think they'll be trying to add one more.
Yep, so Caleb Douglas, commit number 2 from this past weekend, 6'3", 180. So he already has some pretty good size and will just need to put on a few more pounds, and he'll be good to go. And the speed is good. So, yeah, you like the measurables, and definitely an interesting note that was Stuckey's first offer. And you do hear that about this staff. You know, I think it kind of becomes sort of sort of old hat when you hear like kind of the same messages coming from every single direction of like, this staff really cares about me and my family. And, you know, everybody says kind of the same things, but it does seem just based on what we're hearing, like the person over player message really has connected in a deeper way than just being a motto for the 2022 class, like all gas, no brakes, or, you know, OU Outsider 24, or, you know, whatever, like these tags that people put on. I don't even know what Baylor's is this year, you know, Sikkim 20, you know, whatever it is. But the person over player thing, it is kind of reminiscent of when Matt Rule was here and kind of tried to take a different approach with, you know, what they were doing as coaches and recruiters. And there's something really reminiscent of that with this staff as well, of the person and over the player. So it's kind of cool to see that bridge connecting. But it's working, and it's working because it's genuine. And I think that's the biggest thing you take away is it's not just lip service. It's actually a genuine message, and it's definitely, as you'll hear from Anichi Sledge, making a difference in some of these young men's decisions. So you had Anichi Sledge, and then you go offense and you bring in Caleb Douglas. And, well, you know, a position that we've talked about at great length is Baylor's thorn in their side for the last 5 years or so. It has been their offensive line. Now, there have been other areas that have suffered. There have been other areas that have underperformed, but no group more so on a more consistent basis than the offensive line in terms of struggles. I mean, it's what it is. But I think I've said and others have said that we have some confidence that Eric Mateos and Jeff Grimes are going to get this thing turned around. And they needed to come in and as part of that, find some talent and bring in some new bodies and build some depth. And, you know, you're not going to see it right away because these young men have to play their senior years, but you are going to see it next year because 6 offensive linemen have now made their pledges to Baylor in this 2022 class. When this dead period started, the first commit of the 8 this month was Caden Siraki, which gave them 4 offensive line commits. Then just a week ago, it was George Maye making his pledge, and now this past weekend, Alvin Evacelli makes the pledge to Baylor, commit number 6 on the offensive line. None of these JUCOs, mind you. These are all high school players, and he doesn't have a Twitter, so I think it was his mom, posted a message, unless I missed his Twitter. Does he have one?
So his Twitter is deactivated currently, okay, but he posted on Instagram.
Okay, yeah. But then I think his mom posted on Twitter. Did. Yeah, so, that came out yesterday. Alvin Evacelli, you either saw it on his Instagram or on his mom's Twitter, but regardless, that message that was sent was that he's going to Baylor, and Grayson, offensive lineman, bring him on. But what about Alvin Evacelli, and what about the fact that they're now at 6 commits for the O-line?
Yeah, and he was one I got pretty confident about back in May. I know that's when I kind of put my prediction in and kind of put those feelers out that, hey, listen, Baylor has a really good shot at landing him. They've made him a big-time priority in this class. And then coming off of his official visit, I mean, he was just raving about the visit. He talked to Brian and I on Sunday after the visit was over and set his commitment date for yesterday. He told us that. And he also talked about how the school that he wants to choose is a school that values the person over the player. And
heard that somewhere.
I think that kind of gave it away a little bit, and that's obviously fine, but it's just really cool how you just mentioned that, and it continues to resonate with every single commit in this class. Now, as far as Alvin goes, 6'6", 310 pounds. He was my biggest storyline for this weekend as a whole because Baylor simply needs help at the tackle position, and he is the only left tackle in this class. I think he's the only one that fits in to that position. I think Bryce Simpson could be the right tackle, but as far as left tackle goes, that is all Alvin's spot. I'll also say I think it's a pretty big deal that Baylor won a recruiting battle over TCU and Oklahoma State, 2 schools he did take official visits to. So obviously This is a huge win over Big 12 schools, and it puts Baylor in a much better spot along the offensive line because, yes, they have 6 commits, and that's all fine and dandy, but if none of them are tackles, it just kind of defeats the purpose of taking so many because you can only fill 3 spots on the interior of the offensive line. So a huge pickup. I would say this is the biggest pickup of the weekend just because of the position, and obviously the left tackle value is huge. And he's a top 40 player according to our rankings in the entire state. He was all district at Coppell, and a guy who I just think has immense potential. I actually compared him to every single first-round pick in the NFL draft this year as far as his measurables go, and he's right there. I mean, he is right there with Rashawn Slater, Christian Darrisaw, Penei Sewell, and Alex Leatherwood as far as his height, weight, hands, wingspan, and arms. So very, very intrigued there. He's got longer arms than all of them by at least 2 inches, which is really, really crazy to think about. And his hands measure out really well too. So I think this guy could be an NFL prospect if they can develop him right. And I mentioned this to Brian, but I think he is the higher floor version of Elijah Ellis with the same ceiling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And so Alvin Evacelli, commit number 6 on the O-line, joining George Maye out of Utah, who committed exactly a week before Alvin did. Colton Price, who committed back in February. Caden Siraki, who committed just a couple weeks ago. Bryce Simpson, who committed back in May. Timothy Don, who committed back in March out of Arkansas. So pretty interesting group they've been able to put together, and a lot of national flair in this class. It's one thing that, has been talked about. We saw a little bit of it with Matt Rule, Harrison Hand, John Lovett, some of these out-of-state guys, Brooks Miller out of Louisiana.
Garmin Randolph.
Yeah, Garmin Randolph. I mean, there's been a few. Tyquan Thornton, obviously. But, you look around and there's Anichi Sledge out of Monroe, Louisiana, Timothy Don out of Camden, Arkansas, George Maye out of South Jordan, Utah, Zach Pyron out of Pinson, Alabama, Kyan Roberts-Day out of Festus, Missouri. So, a third of the class is out of state, and I don't have a problem with that. I think, Texas should be your bread and butter so long as it fits your interest. But if there's not a guy in Texas or there's a guy outside that's as good or willing to commit to you and you want him, and shoot, I don't care where he's from. So that's been beneficial to kind of go outside the normal parameters a little bit more than maybe we've seen in the past. So big-time commit there with Alvin Evacelli. Coppell, also a good program to pull talent out of, and they will have more, I'm sure, that Dave Aranda and staff will want to take a look at in the future. But that is definitely good news for Eric Mateos and Jeff Grimes and that offensive unit, to be sure. And not to be done, not to be outdone, there was yet another commitment from the class of 2022 extending out of this past weekend, and it was at a major position of need, a major position group of need. The defensive backs have been utterly ignored. No, not really, but they've been blanked so far in this recruiting class. I mean, pretty much the secondary, when you look around and you say, as this thing has continued to grow, where do they need to look now, or where will the focus on the rest of this class be? Well, they had to at some point address the secondary because they had 0 commits there before yesterday. Now, though, they do have one, and it's out of a talent factory by the name of DeSoto High School. Devon Bobby, safety out of DeSoto, makes the call for Baylor. This one, I'm sure you might have had a hint or something, but I was not expecting Devon Bobby's commit yesterday. It just kind of felt like maybe the weekend had run out of gas, and, it was like, hey, that was a really good weekend, but it's time to, get back to normal, and then here comes Devon Bobby's commitment. So 5'11", 175, had a few other offers, including Kansas and Kansas State out of the Big 12. Your thoughts on Devon Bobby?
Yeah, so I posted a note about it in the morning on the premium side of things that I expected Baylor to land a commitment later on in the day. And it was in reference to Devon Bobby. I had heard early that morning that Baylor was going to offer, reached out to some sources, found out he was going to commit as well on the spot. And that's the second player to do that. Cedric Roberts is the other one who, of course, he's not in the class currently. But, yeah, Devon Bobby decided to make his decision. I posted on the board, and, of course, probably 5 minutes later, Steve Wiltfong put a crystal ball in for a guy who didn't even have an offer.
It's weird how that happens.
Yeah.
Time and time and time again.
Very weird. So I was very intrigued by this. So Devon Bobby showed up on campus 12 days ago, and I posted a little bit about it. And I think everyone was really anxious to see if he was going to get an offer. And really his biggest thing is, how tall is he? How tall is he? How fast is he? And that's what Baylor had to find out. And they found out he was 5'10 plus, and he runs a 4.5 40 flat. And that's all they need to know. And so that gave them a really good idea of who he was as a player, and mainly as an athlete, because you turn on his film, my goodness. I mean, 10 forced turnovers in the last 2 years, and a guy who's been first team all-district for 2 straight years at DeSoto, which is pretty crazy. I know DeSoto's really good, but especially this past year when they were in that monster district that they're in now, for him to be the best safety in that district, or at least the second best safety in that district, very telling to the kind of talent that Devon Bobby has. A decent offer list: Kansas, Kansas State, Marshall, UTSA. But I think he was waiting on this Baylor one after he visited. So I do have to go in depth a little bit with this. So he was offered yesterday. But going into the weekend, the prospect that was on campus that everyone was kind of looking at as a potential filler or backup option for Jared Kerr was Jeremiah Cooper out of Andress High School, which is out in El Paso. But he showed up on campus, and the official visit went on, and Baylor just didn't, there was no commitment, nothing like that. So Baylor decided to move on to the next target, and that was Devon Bobby. So I do think Devon Bobby fits into the star position. Obviously, they missed on their top guy, which was Jared Kerr, who committed to A&M. But to find a guy who's very athletic, who can bring a lot of proven production to the position, I think is really big for this team. And they're going to have to replace Jalen Petrie after this year, and it's going to be a very open competition with Lorando Johnson, Devin Lemire, and probably Devon Bobby. And I think that's got to be very appealing as well.
Yep. So, man, what a run, as I said in that tweet. And I actually, in that tweet, forgot to include yet another commit because he's not a member of the class of 2022. They've also added a 2023 commit since we last talked, and that was commit number 1 for the 2023 class. So you still got 6 months until players are allowed to sign, 6-7 months, and yet they are already now starting on 2023. Now, a lot of other teams have already gotten 2023 commits as well, but just the timing of it, and basically you're getting close to full now on 2022 in just the last month, and you're getting started. It's a good thing. It's a good little run of momentum. But Isaiah Crawford out of Post, the Golden Antelopes out there in West Texas. I have been to Post. It was a gas station stop outside of Lubbock. I mean, that was basically what it was, and what I'll always think of it as. But I don't know, maybe I'll be thinking of it now because of a standout Baylor player in the future in Isaiah Crawford. But the young man from West Texas makes the call. He's a 4-star. And, that's kind of a big deal just because it's already this early, and to already have that ranking and be making the commit to Baylor. Not that often that we see that necessarily, but what are your thoughts on Isaiah Crawford kickstarting the 2023 class?
Well, I've put huge expectations on the 2023 class, and how about start it with a guy who I believe is not only a surefire 4-star, which he currently is, but I also think he's a top 25 player in the state of Texas for the class. And so your first guy is that highly rated. I mean, that's going to give you a great shot at landing a lot of other guys who kind of see that momentum building. I think he fits in perfectly with Baylor's defense at that jack position. So Joey McGuire's got to be really, really excited to get him in the fold already. Obviously, you mentioned a 4-star guy. The offer list kind of bears that out. Arizona State, Colorado, Illinois, Mississippi State, Texas Tech, all early offers. And he got these offers even though most of those schools pretty much knew that this was Baylor. I mean, Isaiah Crawford, his uncle went to Baylor, Billy Crawford, and also he's just a kid who has loved Baylor since the moment he got to step on campus. And he came for his visit on June 22nd, and right after that committed. We'd stayed in touch quite a bit. And it was pretty obvious that Baylor was going to be his choice. I actually thought he was going to do it sooner, but he wanted to take his unofficial visit first. So a huge pickup, great start to the class. And I just want to emphasize, I still have huge expectations for 2023. I think, especially on the defensive side of the ball, this class could be very, very special. It might be the best Baylor's ever had. I mean, I'm that bullish on it, and I really think the 2023 recruits in the state of Texas are a big reason for it. There's just a lot of talent at key positions, especially the defensive line and linebackers.
How much will what they do this season matter in that? I mean, like, because you can't have a whole lot of momentum and then go lay an egg, because then it's like, I don't know, your message gets a little bit lost. So
you can't win 2 games.
Yeah, obviously.
No, you got to be a bowl team. If they can make a bowl and show that progression, and especially if they can go, 7-5 or 8-4, and maybe sneak in a win against one of those Texas, TCU, Oklahoma State type games, I think that could bode really well. And I honestly expect that. And if they're able to do that, I think recruiting is just going to continue to take off. And if they really surprise and somehow go out and win 10 games and maybe have the momentum that they got in 2019, the kind of juice that they had coming off of that Sugar Bowl appearance, I mean, then you could be talking about something really crazy where Baylor potentially ends up inside the top 20 in the country, which is foreign territory for this Baylor program.
Yes, it is. So a pretty big run they've had here in the month of June, as I mentioned a couple of times now, but obviously a really good run the past couple weeks. And this past week, Devon Bobby, Alvin Evacelli, Caleb Douglas, and Anichi Sledge all joining the class, as well as Isaiah Crawford, Kickstart in 2023. So, shoot, man, go win some football games. And there's, I've seen the article by Colt and, the mentions of the sleeping giant and things like that. And it's all true, but they actually got to go out and do it. It's like Baylor historically, outside of obviously the men just winning a national title, but I think we could all come up with various examples of when they had the bull by the horns and then they just got distracted and the bull gored them. I mean, that's happened time and time again. They've got the bull by the horns right now. A good solid season, a bowl appearance, if not more, I think could really get this thing rocking. And without the threat of, oh, shoot, the Jets are calling Dave, because that's what happened last time. It started feeling like this a little bit. Although I would say I think this is actually a little further ahead in terms of just quality. Whereas with Matt Rule and them, towards the end, they did start getting, quality guys. But it just never got into the flow of things because there's always the interruption of, NFL talk or whatever it was. So, that sleeping giant talk, it's for real. But you got to go out and win games, and if you do, man, this thing could really – I mean, it's getting fun already, but it could really just head to another level, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
100% agree. Yeah. And I think you and I have talked about the schedule, and we'll dive more into this into off-season talk, but – I mean, there should be big expectations, and there's a real chance for Baylor to capitalize on what is an awesome schedule and what is a very up-for-grabs Big 12 outside of Oklahoma.
Yeah, and I'm going bowl game or bust. I am, and nothing's changing that. It's just a matter of how many games over bowl game status do they win, and in my mind, but I'm firmly at least 6 wins, and I've maintained that for quite a while now. Now, one other note on recruiting. Comes from the transfer portal. Yesterday, a little report was put out there by Bruce Feldman. I've now seen Mike Scarborough, who covers LSU very closely. He's mentioned something as well, but LSU has lost big-time tackle Derrick Rosenthal to the transfer portal, and it was initially mentioned by Bruce Feldman that Derrick Rosenthal had entered the portal and that Baylor was seemingly or perhaps a favorite for Rosenthal. Mike Scarborough, in the last 5 minutes while we're recording this, says that he's hearing Baylor's a landing place, but also Florida State and Missouri are possible landing spots as well for Derrick Rosenthal. So Baylor's firmly in this thing, and perhaps a couple of other schools are as well. But Grayson, the Derrick Rosenthal news, what does it mean, and what could it potentially mean?
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know much about Derrick Rosenthal, he started 3 games during LSU's national championship run, played in 5 games as well. So he already has a lot of experience in that regard, and he was slated to be the starting left tackle this year for LSU. So you're talking about a guy who plays that tackle position who could really come into Baylor and plug and play immediately and be a huge impact. Now, does he play left tackle? Does he play right tackle? Doesn't really matter. You already have Connor Galvin, so you know you're going to have two legit tackles if you're able to land him. And he'd have 2 years of eligibility as well, so you might not just get him for one season. You might really be able to build this out. And imagine if he comes in, you have him for 2 years, and imagine Connor Galvin coming back. I mean, now you have your staples at tackle for 2 straight seasons, which would be ridiculous and huge for this Baylor program. And we'll see what happens with Dare. I know there were some complications with the reasoning as to why he left LSU. Some violations of team rules led to that. So we'll see if Baylor's able to overlook those and kind of do their due diligence. But I can tell you this. Dave Aranda has a relationship with him, which is good news, obviously. And then Dennis Johnson was his primary recruiter when he went to LSU. So there's a huge relationship there as well. And I think that's why everyone is kind of assuming that Baylor's going to be the landing spot, even though I don't even know if Baylor's made that decision yet, whether they want to take him or not. And so...
where's the room?
Right. That's a part of it. I do think they will have room if they want to take him. I do think Baylor will have a spot that's open.
That always magically happens when you need a guy.
It does.
But
It sure does. And so, yeah, I could see that happening. Obviously, Hal Presley transferring from Auburn is another guy who's drawn a lot of attention from the transfer portal, too, as a Baylor connection there. So both of those guys, obviously, I would prefer that if Baylor did take one of the two, that Derrick Rosenthal was the guy just because of the position that he plays. So we'll see how it plays out. I know there's a lot of smoke to this, which usually means there are some legs to it, but I'll also say I'm not sure Baylor has officially made that decision yet. Matter of fact, I don't think they have, but I do think that is coming soon. And I will also say if they want him, I think they have a great shot at landing him.
Yeah, I got a text alerting me to Feldman's mention of Baylor and Rosenthal, and looking more into it, he was like, yeah, it's definitely something worth discussing, which we did a little bit, but at the same time, reading in that article of why he's available and why he's in the transfer portal and then not knowing too much about it, my whole thing was like, rather than pump it up and try to make it sound like, oh man, this would be the greatest thing ever, it's like, I would like to know more first. Based on Baylor's history, I'd like to know a little more information about why exactly he's available. And that's not for me to actually find out myself, but that's for the staff to figure out and then, subsequently decide from there, is this somebody we want to pursue? Because, if it's not that big of a deal, if it was like, being late to class too many times or something like that, you can figure out ways to work around that or to fix that. But, not knowing what it is, I don't want to speculate and just let them do their due diligence and figure out that's something they want to pursue. But if they do want to pursue it, it looks like it's something that could very well be advantageous for them.
Yeah, and so here's a quote from Ed Ogeron on the situation. He had some personal situations that he had to take care of. It was a hard decision, but we wish him the best. We're going to miss him. I think, kind of my takeaway from that is that they had no choice. And what's going on there.
With what's going on at LSU, I'm not going to try to pile on like people did with Baylor back in the day, but I'm not going to really take too much credence in what Ed Orgeron has to say about a player's off-the-field issues at the moment. I would rather hear from somebody else. We'll see. And like I said, don't want to speculate too much, but definitely want to take someone else's word rather than Ed Orgeron with some of the stuff that's been mentioned here over the last year and even here in the last week. But, hey, we also know how lawsuits can go. A lot of nasty things get said that aren't necessarily true, so let it play out, and we'll let the Derrick Rosenthal situation play out as well. But it is of note, obviously, and definitely something of interest to pay attention to. So we've been talking about all these recruits and these commits and everything like that, and we actually had the opportunity to talk to one of Baylor's brand new commits from this past weekend, a member of the 2022 class. He's fresh out the boot, a Louisianimal, and a new addition along the defensive line. Here was our conversation just a little while ago with Baylor defensive line commit Anichi Sledge. And here on the Bearcast, we've been talking a lot about recruiting, and one of the young men that we have been talking about, going over Baylor's rush of commits over the last few weeks. He's a brand new commit, and he joins us now on the phone lines here on the Sikkim 365 Bearcast. Anichi Sledge, big-time defensive lineman out of Monroe, Louisiana, and Neville High School, joins us here on the Bearcast. And Anichi, definitely appreciate your time this morning. And how does it feel a couple of days later to have a major commitment and gotten that all wrapped up and done? How do you feel to have made the call to Baylor a few days ago?
It feels great. It's a great feeling. I'm proud to be a part of Coach Around and his staff's plan that they have for the future,
Yeah, Anichi, I thought it was pretty cool when I reached out to you. I guess it was probably on Thursday, and I kind of asked you, I know you had a commitment date set for July 2nd, but when I texted you about, potentially making a decision over the weekend, you seemed like you were kind of leaning towards, you know what, I may not have to wait that long. What made you go ahead and make that decision, especially very early into your visit?
Well, I seen that Coach Aranda and the rest of the staff, they really wanted me there, and we've been having this relationship for a long time now, and they've been showing it, they've been showing that they really wanted me to be a part of their program, what they have said for the future. And I wanted to be a part of it, and I love how Coach Aranda's coaching is. I love how he acts. He's a very humble coach, and I love that, and I want to be around it. I want to be a part of it.
Anichi, was it kind of surprising to get to know Dave Aranda a little bit? Because for us, we only get to see, so much, and he's, obviously kind of a quiet to himself guy, but when he needs to say something, he can say something. What was it like kind of getting to know him a little bit?
It was very great to get to know Coach Aranda, and I thought he was that coach, that's always fired up, but, he's very laid back and, he sits back very quiet and just, how can I put it? Just watch things, scope things out. And it shows that he's a very humble man, and I love how Coach Aranda is, and I love him. I want to be a part of that, like I just said, but I love Coach Aranda.
So, Anichi, what about your position coach, Dennis Johnson? Kind of just give me a little insight into how that one-on-one meeting went and just kind of what he's told you about your role in this Baylor defense going forward.
Coach Johnson is a very great coach, and we've had a very long relationship, too, since he was at LSU, and he's a very great coach. And he told me my role was, playing like CRTFO. At that nose guard position, and he feels I'm built for the nose guard position, which he knows, which he shows in my film. And, he feel like come in and take over that role and come produce early as a freshman, but I got to work my butt off on and off the field.
Does that sound like music to your ears, working your butt off? Is that kind of your MO anyways?
Oh, it is. It is. At Neville High School, that's what we do. Me and my team, we work our butts off.
Yeah, I was going to say, Nietzsche, I thought it was, you're one of those recruits who I've kind of built this relationship with for a while. I mean, I remember you just sent me a Twitter message with all your information, and this was back in January, and you told me, and this was obviously 6 months before you got your offer, that Baylor was your dream school. So what did it mean to you to get that offer and then to commit to Baylor, which, you said was your dream school even before they really had a whole lot of contact with you?
It meant a lot to me, to actually have this dream come true. God blessed me with that, and I'm very thankful for that. And, every day I wake up, I always pray and I always thank the man above, because without him, I wouldn't have this opportunity, which is a big opportunity to play at Baylor and for Baylor for the next 3 to 4 years. So.
When did you think that? When did the football first get in your hands? How did football kind of enter your life, and when did it become something that maybe family or coaches or even you realize yourself like, hey, this is something I might be able to go and really do something with. I might be able to go play college and beyond. When did that all kind of happen for you?
It all kind of happened my sophomore year. I really wasn't a football type of guy. I was more of a basketball type of guy, but really from a football and basketball family, and I started playing football my sophomore year, and that's when my game went to a whole nother level. It didn't start off easy. Now I can say that. I was a sophomore out there with a bunch of things, because I'm a pretty big guy for my size, bigger than all those other things. But they were some great players, and they took the time with me to develop my game. Like I said, I wasn't always the player that I am now. How I am blowing up now, I was kind of how can I put it? kind of just a big guy out there, but over the time, my game has developed and took me to a whole nother level and started getting interest from schools like half in the mid-season of my sophomore year.
So I know you were on campus over the weekend and you got to meet some of the Baylor commits and potentially future Baylor commits. But when you look around and see how much momentum Baylor has right now on the recruiting trail, how exciting is that for you? And also, I've seen you're very active on Twitter about it as well. How excited are you to kind of try to help continue that momentum?
Oh, this is very exciting. I always find all the Baylor prospects that Baylor offer, and, I'm trying to get them to come home because, we're doing something special at Baylor. And Coach Aranda has a lot going on for Baylor right now. Even though they had a bad season last year, but that doesn't define Baylor because, the Baylor that I know the Baylor that is very good. This 1 and 2 class, we finna turn it up a notch. We finna bring in the best of the best, and we finna compete in this Big 12 conference. We finna give a fight.
So when you were on campus over the weekend, were there some guys that you were able to meet and really build a relationship with that are in the 2022 class?
Yes, sir. It's a lot of guys. Carmelo Jones, Calvin Deaton, and a couple of more guys. Trey Emery, especially my guy Trey Emery. Even though he wasn't on a visit, but he FaceTimed me like mostly every day. To keep up with me and ask me how's it going, things like that. I'm proud to be there.
How much did you and Trey maybe chop it up a little bit about like, hey, this is something together we can be a dominant defensive line, or we can help be a part of a defensive line for this defense?
Oh man, my guy Trey Amber, we've been chopping it up about a couple of months now. We've been talking about this, and I told him, I said we're gonna be future teammates, and well, basically at the same time we told each other, but we spoken into existence, and now look at God, He made it happen, which I'm proud of that, and I'm proud to chat around with Trey Emery and the other defensive linemen.
How much does Baylor's mission, you mentioned thanking God there, how much does the fact that they're a little bit different from maybe every other school, that they're not, shying away from their faith and are open to talking about faith, is that something that was important to you in your decision-making, or something that maybe set them apart from others?
Yes, sir. It was very important, and it actually showed at Baylor. Coach Aranda, he talks a lot about personal player, and that meant something to me because how you go on most visits, you have to ask questions about, are you going to be that coach that wants to develop that player and coach relationship on the outside of the field? But it kind of showed the whole staff, including Coach Aranda, it showed that, they want to be, that father/mentor on and off the field. They want to develop you as a great man on and off the field to be a great husband and a great father someday. And I needed it. And it kind of showed, they gave me the green light right there, like, this is home. Most schools don't even show that.
So does that go in line with that person over player concept that I know a lot of recruits have really loved about Baylor? Was that kind of in line with that? Was that something that stood out?
Yes, sir, it did. It stood out a lot.
Anichi, what's been the reaction like around, school or your family, just your teammates? What's kind of the reaction to your making the call for Baylor?
The reaction has been great. My teammates, they were all proud and happy for me. They were very hyped for me, which, I could have chosen any other school that I wanted to, but, I chose Baylor because it's home, and I didn't want to make the decision even before I had off. Even, before, I played football, I've been watching Baylor and other teams like LSU. I've been following Apu since he was at LSU, and he was kind of a role model for me too. And now he's at Baylor, so they just took it up a notch, and I'm excited to come and watch him play.
That's the second time I've heard you mention Apu, and he has not even played it down yet, Anichi, and yet he's already becoming a fan favorite just because of his personality. He seems like one of the most fun guys ever. Did you get a chance to be around him a little bit on your visit?
No, sir. Actually,
okay.
But I got to FaceTime him, and we got to chop it up. He's a very cool guy, very humble and cool guy. And I love that, and I've been watching him since he was at LSU, like I just stated. Mm-hmm. But, and I'm excited to watch him because he's a beast. He's a beast. And I feel he's going to do some great things for Baylor in that defense front.
So, Anichi, I have to ask, I know you go to a pretty successful high school there at Neville, and there's a big-time commit at LSU, Will Campbell. He's a top 50 player in the country. What are those battles like in practice between you and Will?
Those battles are very fierce and, very blooded, and, but at the end of practice, we back friends. When we step on that field, it's I'm finna come at you and you finna come at me. We finna fight it to the end. We not taking plays off on each other, and it helps my game he helps take my game to a whole new notch. He's preparing me for that next level, and it shows that Will deserves everything that he has, and it shows that he deserves to play at LSU, and I like it. I like that kind of competition because he's doing nothing but preparing me.
So just really quick, back to the recruiting side of things. What is your expectation for this class and how it finishes, and how much momentum does Baylor really have on the recruiting trail right now?
The momentum is high. I mean, I'm hitting these guys up. As you can see, if you go around on social media, on Twitter, as you can see, guys putting Baylor in their top schools, and I'm trying to get them to come home. We got high expectations for this class, and we trying to set the tone. We're trying to win the Big 12 championship. We're trying to bring some home. When we come out freshman year, we're trying to ball. We're ready to ball and take Baylor to a whole new level.
Well, Anichi, I tell you what, man, your commitment among some of these other guys here in the last couple of weeks and what you're saying right now is going to have a lot of Baylor fans fired up if they weren't already. I think that's music to people's ears, and there's definitely something good brewing right now. I mean, since the dead period opened up, there's been 8 commits for Baylor in the last 3 weeks, so there's definitely something cooking right now, and you're a part of that, man, and we really appreciate you taking some time out of your day. I've enjoyed following you on social media, and we'll continue to, hope for the best for you and look forward to covering you sooner rather than later, man. Congratulations on a big decision, and look forward to talking to you again down the line.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for having me on.
Appreciate you. There is Anichi Sledge. He is one of the newest Baylor football commitments, big-time defensive lineman out of Louisiana. And he is one of 8 commits since the month of June started, which is pretty remarkable and just goes to show the kind of thing that momentum can be in recruiting and the kind of thing that you can create when you've got a good message to deliver and you got a real message to deliver. And it's certainly apparent to Grayson that their message is clicking with guys, and they're in a good groove right now.
Yeah, Nietzsche, one of those prospects, very underrated, and a guy who I just think is just so incredibly happy with his decision. As you could tell, like I said, Baylor was his dream school back in January. Once he got the offer, it was a done deal the moment he got the offer at the Baylor camp back on June 5th. And it's clear he's ready to build something special. This class is ready to build something special, and Baylor momentum has absolutely taken off on the recruiting trail.
So there's Anichi Sledge talking about his commitment here with us on SicEm365.com. All right, back here on the Bearcast, that was Anichi Sledge, Baylor defensive line commit. Conversation we had with him just a little while ago, and Grayson really loved what I heard from him. Talking to recruits enough times over the years, it can be very hit or miss, the conversations. You get some guys who, they're teenagers, first of all, so it's like you catch them in the wrong mood, not really a whole lot of talking to them. And then there's some guys who are like me when the radio's not on and just very quiet and kind of chill to themselves, maybe not big talkers. And then there's other guys who can really talk. And, I think Anichi is somebody who not only, is a good talker, but you could tell like there's some meaning behind what he's saying and some belief behind what he's saying. And it's not just one of those like, hey, I like the coaches, like, he sounds bought in. Obviously you are if you commit, but I don't know. That was an interview that I would really love hearing if I was a Baylor coach. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, or a Baylor fan.
Or a Baylor fan, yes.
It was absolutely this is a kid I've gotten to know pretty well, and so it was really cool to talk to him and get him on the radio. He'd been, funny enough, I didn't mention this, but he'd been asking me to get on the radio ever since his camp time. He was like, man, can I come to the studio? Because I asked him, could you do an interview? And he couldn't. He was going on trips, but he was even like, I'll drive from Dallas because I'm up there for a camp and come do an interview. And I was like, just wait till you take your official and then we'll talk. So I know he's been excited about it. I know he's excited about Baylor. When someone says Baylor is their dream school without ever talking to a Baylor coach because he hadn't heard from one back in January, I find that very telling about where he wants to be and kind of his mindset going into Baylor. And he's going to be a great fit for this Baylor system, the 3-4 they're trying to run with Dave Aranda and Ron Roberts, and hopefully everyone enjoyed that.
Yeah, so great to talk to Anichi Sledge, and that's how you pronounce his name. You know, you may have seen it, and it's hard to tell sometimes, like Ennis or Enis, but it's Anichi.
Glad I asked.
Yeah, that's why we have guys on and get clarification and, you know, figure things like that out. But, yeah, Anichi Sledge, just for future reference, and a new member of this Baylor football recruiting class. Enjoyed talking with him. Look forward to talking to him again down the line at another point. So not much else to get into outside of the mailbag. I'm trying to think, because what might be worth mentioning is actually going to be mentioned in the mailbag, I do believe. We will have Nikki Collin on Sikkim 365 radio later today, and that will be coming your way for you Lady Bears fans. But outside of that, yeah, just kind of all recruiting in many ways at the moment. So let's dive into the mailbag this week, and Cup Checker 25. That's definitely a new name to the mailbag, but one that I welcome. We made the top 2 for Derrick Brown. How much of our collective soul do we need to give up to get him in Waco? Well, thank you, Cup, for the question this week.
Yeah, and continue to ask questions, Cup. 7th post all time, so glad that we were able to get one of them inside the Bearcast question thread. So as far as Derrick Brown goes, yeah, I mean, they definitely – he would be a huge pickup. He's a top 300 guy, a 4-star prospect. You'd be winning a head-to-head battle over Texas. I know a lot of people are going to add Oklahoma into that. I'm not sure how much Oklahoma is still pursuing him at the moment. I know he's got an official visit planned in September for Oklahoma. Doubt he takes that now that he's released his top 2 of Baylor and Texas. So, again, head-to-head, I personally, I mentioned this on the board, I think Baylor is the favorite to land him right now. I think Baylor's in a great spot to land Derrick Brown. I've kind of thought this for a while because back at the Under Armour camp when I got to talk to him the last time in person, he just raved about Baylor. And honestly, the first time I ever talked to him on Twitter, he told me that Baylor would be the spot he would commit to if they offered. Now, unfortunately, Baylor offered, I think, like 5th. And then so did every other school of relevance that have offered him. So obviously that clouded some things, all the recruiting sides of that from Oklahoma to Texas. It makes things very intriguing. But I do think Baylor's in a great spot. I'll call them the leader right now. And it wouldn't shock me if the Bears were able to pull off an upset. And I do expect a decision to come in the next month for Derrick Brown.
All right, thank you, Cup. Coach Two Broker, how do you see this class finishing out? What are the position needs that we haven't identified, and which athletes with interest in Baylor can we not pass on even if those positions are filled?
Yeah, so I'm going to actually go in reverse order here as far as athletes with interest in Baylor that you can't pass on. I just personally feel like you can't pass on a Derrick Brown, and I don't think you can pass on a Cedric Roberts either. I know Cedric was committed. He decommitted, came on his official visit. I think those are 2 guys that you can't pass on. I'll also throw in Jaden Gibson, who's out of Florida, the big 6'6" wide receiver. Obviously, if he decided to come to Baylor, you definitely take him at the wide receiver position. So those are the 3 where I feel like you have to take them no matter what. Now, position needs. They got to address the secondary. I mean, they have got to address cornerback and safety. Those 2 positions they really have not addressed. I know Devon Bobby coming in out of DeSoto, he'll address somewhat the safety position, but I expect him to play star, so more of a nickel spot. They really need to kind of address that high safety, that JT Woods. Who's the next JT Woods? Could be Corey Gordon, the prospect out of Oklahoma. He's a safety, about 6'2", 6'3", so he would be one who I would definitely throw in there as a potential option. But cornerback, I mean, after Jalen Peoples committed to Kansas, you're kind of sitting here and going, where do they go next? And Kamari Terrell just got an offer out of Colleen Shoemaker. He would make sense at the cornerback spot potentially, and is a guy who's an amazing track athlete. So would kind of go in line with having Kalen Barnes, Mark Milton, a lot of track guys playing that cornerback spot. So he's another name I'll throw in there. And yeah, finishing out the class, it's kind of those names I mentioned. It's also, Calvin Dinkins. Where does he fit in? to this whole equation. They got to add another wide receiver. They got to add another defensive lineman, probably either Roberts or Dinkins or maybe both, and then address the secondary. That's kind of what they have left.
So, yeah, they're almost filled up, but still quite a ways to go just in finishing off these final few spots. And, again, we have yet to see really any attrition. We saw that, with like John Lovett right after the season ended, or basically anybody who decided to exit was pretty much right after the season ended. But so far, they got through spring ball without any attrition. They're halfway through the summer. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of where they are and how much room they have to actually work with. Scotty B, the Baylor King, what do y'all think about the Baylor volleyball schedule and the non-con, especially starting the year with 5 potential top 10 opponents in the first 6 games? Also, do y'all believe Baylor well, let's just answer that first. I don't have a whole lot of thoughts about the volleyball schedule. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'd be being totally fake if I tried to pretend like I know too much about the volleyball schedule. But, hey, 5 top 10 opponents, you're going to find out real quickly just how good they are. Now, you had a couple of your better players coming back. Obviously, Alvin Presley headlines that. But, yeah, I mean, they seem like after – a couple years of pretty good success. I know last year maybe wasn't quite the way you wanted to finish, but they seem set up, best I can tell. And, like I said, I'm no expert, but best I can tell, it seems like they're pretty well set up for a good run. And definitely with the schedule they have, they can kind of create a little magical start right there at the very beginning. Yeah,
let me lay it out really quick just so everyone has an idea of what the schedule looks like. So they start off in Wisconsin. They play Minnesota and Wisconsin back-to-back two different days. So those are powerhouses, Minnesota and Wisconsin. Then they go to Tennessee and take on Tennessee as well as Pittsburgh. And then they have a doubleheader against Florida in Gainesville. So a lot of traveling early in the schedule. Ooh, that is rough. That's a rough slate. So, yeah, that's a great question. I think it's going to be very difficult for Baylor to come out, unscathed. They're definitely going to have a loss or two in there. But it's going to get them ready for postseason as well as Big 12 play. And, when you're facing Texas twice a year, you better be ready when Big 12 play does ramp up.
Also, do y'all believe Baylor can beat Oklahoma State in Stillwater because Oklahoma State's offense won't be the strong suit compared to their defense? Anyways, I appreciate it and sick 'em. Well, thank you, Scotty B, as always. And, yeah, I definitely think they can beat Oklahoma State in Stillwater. I know Oklahoma State's going to have a good defense. And I know that, Spencer Sanders, and they'll always have a running back and a receiver that can play pretty well. But, I expect them to be good. I don't think they're, unbeatable in Stillwater. I think that magic kind of wore off a few years ago.
While I think they can beat Oklahoma State in Stillwater, I still, as of right now, I do project that as a loss on Baylor's schedule. And that's okay. Going to Stillwater, that's a tough place to play. And, any team that goes in there, aside from Oklahoma, probably has less than a 50% chance of beating Oklahoma State in Stillwater. That's just normally how it is. And I think you might be underestimating Oklahoma State's offense a little bit. That's just my perspective on it. I think Mike Gundy has coached really good offense for a long time, and while they weren't the best offense last year, they really relied on their defense. I do think Spencer Sanders will be better this season. I think we've said that a few times. The turnovers continue to plague him, but I do think he does have talent to be pretty good. They have the 2 Presley brothers who are going to be very, very explosive at wide receiver, along with a familiar face, Langston Anderson. I think he could have a role in their offense at receiver. And then I believe they got LD Bell back for his senior year as well, with Chuba leaving. He'll probably be the bell cow. So I expect them to be pretty good on offense. I think they'll be a pretty good team. They'll be a 7-8 win team.
Sammy Grace Bear, our recruiting success seems off the charts. How realistic is we keep all them who have committed so far? Do we have any needs left, or at this point, is it best available? And, okay, so the first question, how realistic is we keep all them who have committed so far?
I think there's probably a high chance that they don't keep every single one. It's sometimes hard to make sure you land every single recruit committed. So if I had to bet on it, I'd say they probably lose at least one that's currently committed. So, yeah.
Needs left, or at this point, is it best available? Kind of discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, there are needs. Baylor has to take cornerbacks. Baylor has to take another safety. Those are the main needs. Obviously, they also have to take one more defensive lineman. So I would say those three they have to address. Other than that, they can take best available. So, I mean, but if you do the math on that, they have 18 commits. Let's say they take 2 cornerbacks. Now you're at 20. Take one more safety. Now you're at 21. Take one more defensive lineman. Now you're at 22. You maybe have two spots left. Yeah, maybe only one. I mean, that's the hard part there, right? When you still have Jeremy Patton and Derrick Brown still left out there, that's probably all the room you have. That'd get you to 24, and that's right around a full class.
Also from Sammy, what festivity tradition are you looking forward to most coming back this football season? For me, it's the fans, like a full fan showing and not like the 20% or 15% or whatever madness we were doing last year, which I know why, but actual full crowds. That's what I'm most looking forward to. Yeah,
during basketball season, it will be Sing, but little joke there. Definitely not. I know how much people hate Sing during basketball season, but no, my festivity is definitely homecoming. That fanfare when it's actually up and going. I love homecoming. I've always thought it was a great tradition, and when all the fans show up to the game on homecoming, it's really an electric atmosphere. So yeah, I'll go with homecoming.
All right, a few more to bust through here. Captain Jacob, what are Sean Bell's most important things when he looks for evaluating a quarterback?
Yeah, so I do think he does value arm talent. I think that's going to be something that's very important to him. I'll also say the ability to move. You got to be able to move. You can't be a statue. So Zach Smith, not going to work in what Sean Bell is trying to do. But I do think the quarterbacks they have on campus actually fit that mold pretty well. I mean, you look at Gary Bohannon, Jacob Zeno, Blake Shapen, Kyron Drones, Zach Pyron, C.J. Rogers. They all can move. And so I think that's a common trait that Sean Bell is really looking for. And I think probably the most important one is going to be the ability to throw on the run, the ability to make those off-platform throws where you're having to move out of the pocket and extend a play. Can you still look down the field and make an accurate throw and deliver the ball appropriately? I think those are the biggest things that I've seen from Sean Bell as far as who he's recruited and as far as kind of what he's looked for when I watch them in practice, the things that they're working on. It's a lot of rollouts, a lot of just being accurate while you're moving.
Bear Power 56, if Baylor only gets 4 wins in 21, how many of the recent commits will decommit? Everybody's so worried about decommits after this big weekend. Everybody's like, now how will it fall apart? But if they only get 4, yeah, there's probably going to be a few that decommit. Or I don't even know if it would be a few, but yeah, you'd probably suffer somewhat from that, but do you have any sort of number you want to throw out there?
Yeah, they're not only winning 4 games with the schedule.
No, if they do, then Dave Aranda should be fired. I mean, honestly. Yeah. I mean, that would be disastrous after a full off season. If they win 4 games, that's ridiculous.
And that means you only win 1 game outside of Texas State, Texas Southern, and Kansas.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, no. That's just not acceptable. So, yeah, they would lose a lot. I could see them lose. Every one of the top commits, yeah, they'd probably lose 5 at least, maybe 6 would decommit.
On the flip side, if Baylor wins 10 games, will they finish with a top 20 class for 22?
No, I don't believe so. I think you're going to see the momentum really catch fire in 2023. We just mentioned how they're already kind of running out of spots, so you're not going to have a whole lot left when the season's over. And also, a lot of guys have made their decisions by then with the early signing period. It's hard to go out and flip guys. I know, Baylor had Alfred Collins and Princely Umanmielen kind of at the end of their recruiting cycle in 2019, but they'd already built really good relationships with them, whereas Baylor's kind of filling up, and I could see those guys maybe being Derrick Brown and Jeremy Patton, but I don't think they move the needle enough to put them inside the top 20. I'm anticipating top 30, but as I've said, I think 2023 is where you'll see the major momentum and maybe see them get inside the top 20, which would be pretty crazy.
PB Pope, my personal memory of previous camp seasons is always a huge amount of hype that most of the time ends up leaving me slightly disappointed versus expectations. Is the most successful camp season you can remember? If not, what's yours?
Camp season. So I guess he's talking about the summer camps that Baylor had?
I guess he's talking about the run of commits they just had. And if, he's basically saying that camp season, there's always a huge amount of hype that most of the time ends up leaving me slightly disappointed versus expectations.
Yeah, I guess the camp was kind of because instead of visits. But yeah, okay. So
he's talking about in general, like visits and recruiting, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to be disappointed at all with what they've been able to do. I think there was a lot of hype coming off of the first official visit weekend, but I don't think there was a ton going into it. I think everyone was just kind of wanting to feel things out and see how this staff handled their visits. And so I think this is definitely the most successful one I've ever seen. And I think a big part of that is the simple fact that Baylor had built these great relationships heading into these official visits, and it really allowed them to capitalize on it once they were able to have this face-to-face contact with recruits. I think if you're a Baylor fan, you have to be completely on board with the fact that Dave Aranda and this staff are elite recruiters. I mean, that's just, at the end of the day, that's what it is. And Dave Aranda is simply, since I've been covering Baylor, he's simply the best recruiting head coach that has been at Baylor since I've been covering it.
Well, it'd be amazing if he could be just the winningest coach, and then you could really see recruiting take off in a major way, because that would be a double whammy that Baylor has not seen before in their history. To have a coach like him that can recruit like he can with this staff, and then add wins to that, it could be, like we were saying earlier, pretty special. So yeah, I can't remember a camp season like this. I mean, off the top of my head, with like 8 commits in a month, or 9 counting the 2023. So yeah, 9. I don't quite remember. I mean, there's been rolls, but it's usually like 2 guys coming out of a weekend. It's not 4, and then another 4 the following week. It's like 4 total. So it's been pretty remarkable little run, and I can't really compare it to another one off the top of my head. Doc Crowl, how does this O-line class compare to all others of the past 10 years? You got that 2012 Baylor recruiting offensive line class set up over there?
I think that this is the best one for what Baylor is trying to do as an offense. So obviously Brawl's recruiting classes were going to fit his scheme, and not many of those guys did a whole lot in the NFL. I think that the guys that they are bringing in
really
now,
none of them did anything. Yeah.
And so I guess that's kind of my point. I think these guys fit the scheme a little bit better, and I actually think they probably have more NFL prospects in this class than the other ones before them have had. I like some of the classes that Rule brought in. I think that there's some sneaky upside from those guys that maybe we haven't gotten to see quite yet. And I think it's unfair to make a judgment on a full class when really, they're sophomores or juniors, especially on the offensive line, where you don't take those big steps till later on in your career. And so that's why, 2018, I think, is one that I look at and go, that was kind of a little bit of a bust outside of Connor Galvin. And so it
was great if you're an FCS fan.
Right, exactly.
I mean, there was an all FCS offensive line, but the problem is they play FBS.
But the one that I think I look at and I go, okay, let's wait. Let's wait to make a judgment, in my opinion, is 2020. When you have Gavin Byers, Moj Jeffrey, and Micah Maskua, I think those are 3 guys that could be very good. I think that class could be sneaky and have a little bit of upside, but outside of that, I love what they've done in 2022. I think they're absolutely loaded. I think there's an opportunity for Maye to be a contributor as a freshman, as a redshirt freshman. And I think Alvin Evacelli will be a guy who has major expectations as he's probably enters his 3rd or 4th year on campus. I think he could be the starter at left tackle, which would be huge as well. And I think Bryce Simpson has great upside too. So very good class with some upside mixed in there. And then some guys who I think the verdict's still out to be determined. Timothy Don, Colton Price, we'll see how they develop. Caden Siraki as well.
All right, a couple more before we close this out. Doc Crowl, this was one other note. I meant to mention it earlier, but Kyan Roberts-Day did reaffirm his commitment to Baylor. That was another note that just got lost in the shuffle of all of the pledges over the last week. But after his visit, he did come out and say that he was shutting it down and he's 100% going to Baylor, which was a big deal. I'm not trying to just throw it in there. That was a big deal to hear, and welcome news, I'm sure, for the staff. But in line with that, Doc asks how, aside from tight end, he will be utilized. I'm still not convinced his ideal fit isn't at Jack.
I mean, I think that a lot of people would argue that his best fit is at Jack. I think the staff even would potentially argue that his best position is the Jack linebacker spot. But the thing of it is he is too special. Honestly, I just think in today's game, when you have a guy like him, you kind of want him to play offense. And the reason I say that, and I've mentioned this a couple times, but he is literally Kyle Pitts. And that's crazy to say. He doesn't have, you don't see the receiving and the route running as much currently on his film. But if you give him time, he can absolutely turn into Baylor's version of Kyle Pitts. 6'4", 242 pounds. Kyle Pitts at Florida's Pro Day was 6'5.5", 245. So he's got an inch and a half on him, but right around the same weight. But I mean, a 4.54 40 time, 38-inch vertical, 11.3 broad jump. I mean, Kyle Roberts Day is absolutely a physical freak, and you compare him to Pitts. Pitts 4.44 as a junior at Florida is what he ran, but coming out of high school was only a 4.7 guy. So Kyle Roberts Day has him beat there. 33.5-inch vertical. Kyle Roberts Day has him beat by over 4 inches on vertical. That's the explosiveness that he brings to the table. So honestly, he's going to play wherever he wants to play. And I think at the tight end position, he could be a true difference maker. And that is not me saying he couldn't be really good at Jack, because he absolutely could be. But I think there's something special with what he could do in Jeff Grimes' offense. I don't know that Jeff Grimes has ever had a tight end with this kind of athletic ability, and I know Baylor sure hasn't.
And finally, from Doc, which is better, cold pizza for breakfast or breakfast for dinner?
Ooh.
I'll go breakfast for dinner. I don't do that often, but I don't want to say I dislike cold pizza, but I'm not nearly as much of a fan of it as I was when I was younger. Like, I'd much rather have a hot slice of pizza. I don't really do the cold slice, especially not in the mornings anymore. So I'm going to go with breakfast for dinner as better, although this answer may have been different about 10 years ago when cold pizza was just like the only thing in the fridge to grab out of. But, I'll go breakfast for dinner.
For me, it's easily breakfast for dinner, but I will say cold pizza, the only way I like it cold is if it's really good pizza. Like, it's got to be like the best pizza you've ever had, and then that pizza is amazing. But you don't get that very often. So I'll go with breakfast for dinner, which is a staple of mine. I love breakfast for dinner.
Yeah, I don't really do cold. Like, it's cold one thing if it's like fruit or salad or something, but like I don't dislike cold pizza. It's just I want the melted cheese. I want like the grease and all that stuff. So I'd have either right now, as a matter of fact, but breakfast for dinner if I had to choose. So thank you, Doc, for that question, and thank you, PB Pope and Bear Power 56 and Captain Jacob and Sammy Grace Bear and Scotty B. the Baylor King and Coach DeBroker and Cup Checker 25 had their first question this week. Thank all of you for the questions, as always. And Grayson will have another post up here in a few days or at some point this weekend that you can jump on and get your questions in for next week's episode. But that's going to about wrap it up. No camps this weekend. No camps till what? When?
July 31st will be the next camp and the last camp. So, that's one to look out for. But other than that, I mean, Baylor's really going to be focusing on getting ready for the season and trying to land some of these prospects that they're still in on for the 2022 class, while also looking forward to 2023 a little bit.
Yep, so we'll have a little bit of a break in the nonstop recruiting, news updates, but that won't, mean there won't be a lot of news and updates. It's just going to not be camp season for a little while, but there's been plenty of content over on the site, and will be plenty more coming up. As I mentioned, Nikki Collin, Lady Bears head coach. By the time most of you listen to this, you'll be able to check that out from this afternoon's episode of Sikkim 365 Radio. We'll have Mac Rhodes later on this week as well to talk about the latest with Baylor Athletics and just tons and tons and tons of other stuff. Go over to the website and become a premium member if you have not already. And before we go, also want to thank one of the newest Baylor commits, Anichi Sledge, for joining us and telling us a little bit about his decision and why Baylor and what stood out to him. And it was really good stuff from Anichi Sledge. So do want to thank him for being the first ever phone guest of this very podcast, even though we've been doing this like 3 years now. So congrats, Anichi, and good to have you with us. Anything else, Grayson, before we go?
No, just excited to continue moving forward. Recruiting never stops, so if you're not a Sikkim 365 Premium subscriber, I really encourage you to give it a try. I mean, we have notes up on every recruit that Baylor's going after. We even have notes up on Derrick Rosenthal right now, the LSU transfer. So definitely stay tuned in, stay plugged in if you're already a member. And if you're not, I promise you won't regret giving it a try.
All right, so with that being said, thank you to Jack and Armstrong for running things behind the scenes. Thank you again to Nietzsche Sledge, and thank you to all of you for listening as you do every week. Make sure to not only go check out the joining of the premium forums, but definitely tell friends, tell family members, whoever that may not be aware of Sikkim 365 and Sikkim 365 Radio or this podcast. Spread the word. Help us out a little bit. We do appreciate that, and we appreciate you listening. Until next time, it's been the Bearcast on Sikkim 365 Radio.